Bootstrap Confidential, the podcast where we talk to successful bootstrappers about the playbook for bootstrapping.
Welcome to Bootstrap Confidential, where this episode I'm delighted to be talking to Jennie Moss. Jennie is a successful entrepreneur and bootstrapper and now investor, and in the events and media space. So after a stellar career at various global bodies like CWC and IQPC, she decided to launch Rethink Events, which she built up from 2011 to 2024 before a successful exit. So Jennie, thank you very much for joining us, and and welcome to the show.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Fantastic. I always like to start with, obviously, you'd spent over a decade, in very successful corporate career in established event companies, and then, as you say, you effectively launched Rethink Events from your kitchen table. So, what was the aha moments where you thought, I'm going to do this myself, and what was the thing? What made you leap off the fence into the unknown?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of things. I think obviously one of the big drivers is I just had children. And so I was at a bit of a junction in my career. I was freelancing at the time. And I think really looking at the industry, I realized it was going to be very difficult for me to go back into a full-time role within the conference and events industry. But I was finding freelancing kind of unsatisfying. It wasn't greatly paid. It was also, quite isolating. You're on your own. And actually, I really like working as part of a team. So there was that. It was a bit about taking control of my own destiny and thinking, okay, well, actually, maybe if I build something myself, then I can make it work around my lifestyle. And then secondly, I think it was, having the ideas. So, I'd worked for a number of different conference companies, as you mentioned, both sort of full-time and then freelancing. And I think with any company, you realize every company has its own merits, but also its own faults. And so over time, you get a really strong idea of kind of how it could be done or what you would do if you did it yourself. So I think I had that in the back of my mind. And yeah, that combined with obviously my idea. Really, I had an initial idea for one conference, and then I started with that. So I just thought, actually, I'll just start small. I'll start with one event and see how it goes.
And with that idea, is that something where, you had a very, very, fixed and firm idea of, this is the conference I want to do, and this, I think this is going to work? Or did you have a notion of, I think I can do something in this space and I need to chat to some people, poke around in corners a bit, kind of try, get a little bit more clear on exactly where it is? Or was it a very, very fixed, I know exactly where I'm going here?
No, it's definitely the latter. So basically, I've been working in the energy industry mostly. So with CWC, it was the oil and gas industry. And then I've been doing some freelance work for the Financial Times and Green Power conferences, mostly around renewable energy events. And actually, I was talking to a lot of investors and operators in that space, and they were all talking about water continuously as being the main problem they were facing, or that was going to affect the future of the industry. So I knew there was something to be done around the water sector. But that's a very small, idea. So yes, I definitely then had to kind of take the time to, talk to the industry a lot, and work out the angle and the direction to take to put something together. But I definitely knew I wanted to do something around water.
And nowadays, I mean, I don't know if it's it's kind of culturally become so accessible and so normalized now, maybe because of Hollywood and media and stuff. But now anyone starting a business, like, it's almost, you start a business, you go and get investment, seed money, VC money, angel money. It's just like, and you yourself are a seed and angel investor now, so you know that. But 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't quite such a fixed route. So did you consider, like, getting seed money or angel money, or did you just go, I'm just going to see if I can bootstrap this from the kitchen? But what was your reasoning that you were going to just, go yourself?
Yeah, I didn't really consider taking investment, actually. It wasn't something that I think was hugely on my radar. And I think the benefit of the conference industry is that you don't have a huge amount of capital requirements up front. And so, I was able to get the idea quite progressed just myself at home, as you say, at the kitchen table. And then when I was ready to go, I sort of rented a little office. I recruited a couple of people to work for me a couple of days a week on a freelance basis. The big upfront cost is the venue, but actually I managed to find a venue in London that didn't require massive deposit. So, I didn't have a huge amount of costs up front. So yeah, I just thought we we'd go for it alone and see how it worked out. So yeah, it didn't really crossed my mind. There were times sort of once we'd got going, I did have a couple of people who kind of approach me and sort of say, "Oh, you're looking for investors? Would you like investment?" Um, but also, I think one of the joys of running your own business is that you're master of your own destiny and you're in control. I mean, that's one of
Absolutely.
the reasons I set it up. So if I didn't have to take investment, I chose to avoid that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the founders I was talking to a couple of episodes was going, said, being honest, I hate being told what to do. And
Yeah,
why swap a boss in a big corporate institution for an investor who effectively is going to tell you what to do? But
yeah,
also,
that's the risk.
I mean, the last one, the last business I started back in 2006, like someone asked me, did you think about investment? And like it just wasn't on my radar. I thought like there's a place called Silicon Valley where people invest in tech businesses and that type of thing. And then there's the rest of us who are just starting businesses without really thinking
Yeah.
about it like in the very codified terms you have these days. But just coming on to say, you've got a small office, you've got a couple of freelancers,
Mm.
it starts to work, you start to build the business, you start to move from freelancers to full-time employees, you grow the office. How how deliberate were you, if at all, in going, okay, well, this is the kind of culture I want at Rethink, and this is how I'm going to try and build that culture? Or did you just crazily build the business and the culture kind of like, grew of its own accord as you were building it? How deliberate were you in thinking about the culture that you wanted and how to
Yeah.
codify that and exemplify that?
I think very deliberate, actually. Yeah, I think, if you're building a business yourself, yeah, you want people who are going to work together well with you and with the team and build the business that you've got the vision for. I think what's interesting, because I'm based in Brighton, and actually in Brighton there really weren't many people who had experience in the events industry. So almost everyone I recruited didn't have conference and events experience. So they were
Okay.
coming from different industries. And actually, I think that allows you to then build your own culture because people aren't sort of coming with preconceived ideas of what their role's going to be. And I think, because of the sectors we were working in, so we started with water technology, and then we expanded actually mostly into ag tech and food tech. And so obviously it's all around sustainability, food security. And so I guess what I looked for is people, basically super bright people who were passionate about the sectors that we were working in, because I think if you bring that passion to your work, it drives through and maximizes success. And then people who kind of had the flexibility of mindset to work in a small startup company, people who were prepared to chip in, do things that weren't necessarily within their job description, help each other out, work as a team. I think when you start, you need flexibility. And I think I was quite lucky when I think back, in those early days, I had some fantastic people who joined who were, working in sales, but would also run the vacuum round at the end of the week because, we didn't have a cleaner or anything. You need
Yeah.
people who are happy to kind of chip in with whatever needs doing. Yeah.
And I mean that's so true of many startups. And the temptation is as you scale and grow, how do you maintain that culture? So you've got people who weren't experienced in conferences and events. You're building, or you're basically training them up exactly as you want them, which is fantastic. But when you get to a certain size and you start to have more funds in the bank, a bit more capital, is the temptation to then go and get people who've got specific expertise in conference and events? And if it was, how do you then merge those people who've got all the passion and energy and have helped grow it from nothing effectively up to like a few million in turnover, and then suddenly you're bringing in people from more traditional corporate, perhaps less willing to run the vacuum round at the end of the week, type thinking.
Yeah.
How did you blend? I mean, did you do that? And if so, how do you blend that as you start to scale?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And well, hopefully, as you get started to scale, we could afford a cleaner, so there was some benefits
There is
around
that,
that as
yeah.
well. But no, I mean, we did obviously bring in, some people with more experience, be that in events or be that in other industries. People at a higher salary level. I think, to be honest, I think as you grow, you can still look for the same, basically super bright people, passionate people. I think as you grow, perhaps some of that flexibility does reduce because you have more structures in place, you have more defined job roles and responsibilities because you kind of have to, because you have to have a few more systems and processes in place. And maybe you lose some of that slightly more free flowing feel that you have when you're a small startup. I think things definitely do become a bit more structured. Yeah.
Yes, and I do remember one time walking into the office and seeing someone new, and after asking who's that person and who employed them, and no one could work out who this person was or who'd employed them. Going, okay, we need some structure. This fast growth and crazy growth is great, but like frankly, having someone here and no one knows why they're here, that's a little that's a little bit too. But also one of the things I found was it was frankly quite difficult because obviously if someone comes to interview you at Rethink, for example, and you're growing super fast, you've got all these bright people, you're talking about your growth, you're talking about how exciting it is, you're talking about flexibility. I think these days it's neurodiversity, but the ability to to swap the things between different things and do things that perhaps you're not trained for. Anybody in an interview goes, oh, absolutely, I love a vertical learning curve, I love growth, I love being outside my comfort zone. But then you employ them and you discover actually like they're too almost institutionalized. They don't actually like it quite that much. And so how did you, because we were not very successful at first, we kept on bringing, once we got to a certain size, we started bringing in people with like 20 25 years experience, and then sort of 6 months later you're crying into your hands going, this is not working, because they just couldn't, like, old dog new tricks. They just couldn't adapt to the still free flowing culture, not as free flowing as it was, but compared to like a corporate global institution. So how did you how did you identify those that they had those traits that you wanted, and then B, if they were challenging, how did you try and like retrain, for lack of a better phrase?
I think to be honest, we didn't recruit anyone at that level of seniority. So maybe that's, I think we did keep, in the, over the sort of 13, 14 years, we did keep recruiting probably people who were earlier in their careers. Obviously people who did have experience, but no one with that kind of 25 years sort of institutionalized probably. So I think as you grow, I think you can accommodate people with different working patterns. I mean, I'm just thinking, did we try and change people? No, I think you try and bring people in and you try and be a bit more flexible around them and their working patterns as well. And I think that's important. Some people do like to work in a more structured way. Some people prefer to work, alone. Some people, need to be in the middle of lots of noise and etc. So I think as you go, you do try and kind of adapt to people in that way. But I do think I did always look for people who were prepared to go the extra mile. I think the thing that I think if I was to ever get frustrated with an employee, it'd be someone who was very sort of fixed in terms of their role, and actually you want people who are going to really just put some extra energy in and do the extra that's required for success. So I think that's what I looked for. And but we didn't, over time, I'll be honest, there were very few people we ever let go.
Okay.
It was really rare, and that was where there was just and I think you usually see that very quickly. I think anybody we let go was usually very soon, because it was just obvious that it just wasn't a fit.
Yeah, I mean, we had a blame thing, whether if something went wrong and they started blaming everyone else, that was the first red flag, rather than like just trying to fix it. But coming back to when you were growing, so obviously you got a strong background in conference producing, putting agendas together and everything. As you start to grow, though, you actually start to, you're running a business now where you have CEOs, you have sales skills, you have HR, you have ops, you have products, you have an array of skills. And some founders basically watch a load of YouTube videos, download some courses, and try and do as much as they can before they have to spend money on bringing in people with specialist skills. I wouldn't recommend that with the CFO, but with other areas, like you could probably get away with that to a degree for a while. And some founders go, you know what? I need someone who's got a lot of knowledge and experience in that very specific area of finance or technology or operations. So which did you do a lot of did you do sort of self-teach and like sort of like sticky plaster and everything until you had the money to employ people, or were there certain jobs where that's too important, I need to get someone with experience in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the joy of launching your own business is you do everything at the beginning. So yes, at the beginning, I sort of taught myself, a bit of HTML and was updating the website and doing the emails, and you're literally doing all of that. So I guess the main decision I made in that regard was, so at the beginning of 2015, I brought on my business partner, Stefan Grove. So, and his background was very much on the commercial side. So he'd also had a career in the conference and events industry, but very much in that sales commercial director role. And obviously my background had primarily been in production and marketing. And I think, developing and growing and training a sales team is such an important part of a growing business. And yes, I think I had been doing my best up until that point, but when when you've reached the end of your skill set, and actually if we were going to grow at the kind of pace that we wanted to grow, actually bringing someone in with those skills, and even just simple things like setting up Salesforce, we were just still working off Excel sheets, so bringing someone in who could actually set up a proper CRM and sort of professionalize the sales team was really important. So I think that was probably a big decision in that regard, in terms of recognizing my skill set. In terms of things like finance, I mean, I was lucky. We just had a really good accountancy firm that we worked with from day one, and they did a huge amount of that for us, in terms of they ran our payroll, did our management accounts, etc. So actually, what we found is we didn't bring in a CFO. We had kind of what we needed kind of on an outsourced basis on the finance side, which was really great.
So you brought your partner in 2015. So you had a
Yeah.
4-year period where, as you
Yeah.
say, you were effectively selling with no sales background or sales experience, which is very common for founders. Some founders come from a sales background. A lot don't, and they can't. You've got two options. You either bring in someone straight away as a kind of co-founder who's got a lot of sales experience, or you sell yourself. And lots of people decide to sell themselves. So selling's quite, I mean, I've got a sales background, so, and I found selling myself when it was my own business quite daunting, and I spent 25 years in sales. But like, selling if you haven't sold is really quite daunting, but it's something that lots of founders, especially ones bootstrapping, need to do. So how did you kind of, did you just jump in, feet first? Did you, how did you kind of overcome that? And how daunting was it for you to actually go out and sell when it's, when it's your product?
Yeah, no, I think, to be honest, when I'd worked at CWC, running the events there, we did a lot of events in the Middle East, which I was running. And actually, I think my role had incorporated quite a lot of meeting with commercial partners. I'd go out to the Middle East with my colleague, who's the business development manager, but we'd run meetings together. So I had been exposed to that sales process. So it wasn't that I was, completely new to it. Yeah, I think that was okay. I think that that's something that because I was so passionate about what we were doing, and I believed in the events we were running. And yeah, I had been involved in sponsorship conversations before. So that for me, I think wasn't the biggest challenge. Obviously, from early on, I employed people on the sales side, but I would often get out there and join them in meetings and as well. But yeah, I quite enjoy sales, and and I think there's no one that can talk more passionate about their business than the founder. So
Yeah.
I think I could do that part. I could, talk about what we were doing, why it was important, and then obviously, the sales professional would often then sort of, follow up and actually put together the contracts and the deals.
I mean, that's so true. People buy passion, and
Mm.
and every founder should be the most passionate person on the planet about their particular idea and their value proposition. So you've had a huge amount of fast growth into different sectors, doing events all over the world. Normally, as people grow, and you feel free to say, "Oh, that didn't happen to us," but normally as people grow, some things work, some things work brilliantly. Some things don't quite work, and some things like, oh, that's a slight misstep. We need to rethink there, or that's not quite going according to plan. And generally there are revenue forecasts, and it's like, oh, we might be a little bit optimistic on that one there, or we might need to pivot a bit there. So firstly, did that happen to you at all? And secondly, how did you deal with that when those kind of like unexpected roadblocks occur, or you've got a little bit too optimistic on revenue forecasts on a certain event or market that you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, because we didn't just put on lots of events. So, I think some sort of business events businesses, their model is to put on lots and lots of events and see which stick. And I think we deliberately didn't do that, and kind of very much started with like 2 in our first year, 3 in our second year, 4, sort of grew by 1 or 2 events a year. So we put a lot of work in early doors on each event. So hopefully if something wasn't going to be a runner, we would identify that earlier and ditch the idea before we went too far down the road. So there were definitely some of those where we had an event idea, we started work on it, and then after, a few months, we were like, actually, that's not, that hasn't got legs. I think what's interesting with events is sometimes you can't necessarily predict which are going to be the big growers, and so we definitely had some events which were successful, and just hit a kind of a point where they just leveled off. And each year you'd have maybe 250 attendees, and it would be a very nice event, but they weren't sort of taking off. And then we had other events, primarily in agriculture at the beginning, and then food, but which just kind of exploded beyond our wildest dreams. So there's a bit of luck as well, I think, sometimes with events. If you hit a particular market at a particular time in its growth curve, and you've just hit the right place at the right time, then there is luck. So you can predict away. It's why I'm always a little bit skeptical about financial forecasts and budgets, because they're educated guesses, and actually it can go both ways. You can actually end up doing something that's twice as good as you thought, and then something else that you thought was maybe going to grow by 20%, she might just level off.
I think it's all products. Like there's definitely a certain amount of luck. If you go into a market, this happened to us in the Middle East, you go into a market at a certain time with a certain product when the market's doing that, and suddenly you're having to refocus a lot of your like resources on that market because it's growing way above what you think. And then other markets, you go in with a big ta-da, we're here, and then you just kind of go, okay, well, we're here, and nobody seems to care. Well, no, like this isn't going quite according to plan. But just thinking about those challenging moments and when they happen. Did you use mentors at all? Did you have like people that you could talk to that who were experienced in the industry that you kind of had a network of, or did you just basically just you and the team internalizing everything, or which was the route you took? And not necessarily formal advisory board, but people you could have a coffee with, or perhaps a formal advisory board.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I didn't really. And actually, if I had to go back and change something, I probably would have put that in place. And had, because obviously I do know people from the industry from my past career, and actually I probably should have actually connected with them more. So we did tend to kind of just internalize things. It was great after bringing a business partner on board, because when it's just you as a founder, that can be quite a lonely place to be, overcoming challenges and making decisions. But actually having two of you working together and brainstorming solutions is a good thing. In terms of, obviously the big challenge that hit us was COVID, and actually at that point, there was a few of us in Brighton. Actually, there's actually a decent event industry in Brighton, and there's a company called Smarter Shows, there's Diversified, and kind of maybe 5 or 6 of us actually did kind of team up when COVID hit, and we used to kind of have online meetings and just talk about what we were doing and how we were tackling it. And actually that was very helpful and kind of collegiate, and we all managed it in different ways, but actually it just helped to talk things through with people who were going through the same thing, and that was very helpful. But longer term, I probably didn't have those kind of mentors that I think probably would have been valuable, actually.
Yeah, no, I was similar. I wish I had mentors. I was just charging off, working things out for myself. Whereas actually now, most founders I talk to were smart enough to get mentors, and every time I'm like, that probably would have been a really good idea, because I knew the people that I should have been talking to. I just didn't talk to them. But just coming back to something you said there about, obviously by the time we got to COVID, you were quite well established, quite big. But in the first kind of 4 or 5 years, maybe it's before your commercial partner started, most startups, you're dealing with a huge amount of rejection. However well you plan, the event, or what you're going to do, there's still an enormous amount of no, not interested. And then when things are working, there's a huge amount of mental stress. Like, I mean, you're on 24/7. There's no two ways about it that the people who aren't founders don't quite sometimes grasp. So how did you? We firstly we expect things to be quite as to require quite as much mental resilience as it does. And when those kind of like stressful times are happening, were there sort of go to techniques or things that you did to just try and like dial the temperature down and make sure you're making smart decisions?
Oh, I mean, I think, one thing I did find, because I had, relatively young kids sort of during the early days of setting up my business, is that really brings you back down to earth. And it could be quite good. You've had all of this at the office and everything seems super important and super kind of, you're so focused on all of these issues around work, and a sponsor that's turned you down, and feel like the bottom's dropped out of your world. And then you sort of, you get home and actually there's just the practicalities of kind of cracking on and looking after your kids and getting them off to bed and all of that. And actually, I found that to be a real sort of leveler and sort of bring me down from some of that stress. I think we were lucky at Rethink, is that we did have a really nice supportive team environment, and I think that really helped as well. There were people, not just Stefan, but I had a really, colleague who was with me from day one called Abigail Ryder, and she was a really good sounding board, and my marketing director Anna Blade. And, I had people in the office who I could actually sit with and chew the fat with properly, and come up with solutions. So I think that really helped. I'd love to say I had brilliant techniques, like, I'd just go out and, run or do things like that. But I wasn't. I didn't have time. And I think one of the things, I definitely found running my business is the things that dropped off were things like, actually exercising and all the things that are sort of good for you. Actually, they were the things that I didn't have time for and that probably got neglected.
Yeah, I think I was talking to Piers Byrne at Collingwood, who I know you know about, when he was as what he was experiencing as a founder, and he was saying he'd love to get up at 5 in the morning and do yoga, or do an exercise class at 8 o'clock in the evening, but more often than not, you're just far too busy, and then you kind of collapse with a glass of wine, like in one eye open, watching Coronation Street, as you
Yeah.
nod off, ready to go again the next day. Yeah, it's one of those things that you talk about, sort of like theoretically, but I don't know. Any founder that has like kind of like nailed that, I have this really good plan for like what to do when I'm stressed. I applaud hugely. But talking more sort of widely about startups and founding businesses, there's a phrase I keep coming back to that I came across last year, called founder tourism, which is probably a result of social media and TikTok and Hollywood. Entrepreneurs are fettered in the way that they weren't 20 years ago. And everyone knows who Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, who these people are, and the wealth they've achieved. And that's kind of created this idea now that like, oh, the best thing to do is and you can even go to university and do courses like how to be a founder, which I find quite terrifying. But like, so the phrase founder tourism talks about, all these people start these businesses and they say, I'm the founder of this, and they kind of see like the lovely promised land at the end, and they're like, this is going to be great, this is going to be amazing, and then they kind of run headfirst into the reality, which is really quite different, as every founder knows. So how do we go about as a kind of, I'm not sure there's such thing as a founder industry, but if there was, what do you say to someone to encourage them to start a business, but at the same time forewarn them that it might not be quite as easy as they think? Like, how do you kind of get that balance? Like, I mean, if someone came to you and said, I have an idea for a business, would you say, okay, careful what you wish for? Or would you say, absolutely, you should go for it, but these are some of the things you should think of? And what would be the kind of like one or two things you would tell them to really think through before they started?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I would definitely encourage people to start their own business. I think, I've definitely really enjoyed that process. I really enjoyed it. There was very few stages that I can look back and say I didn't enjoy, and just being that kind of, being in charge of your life, and I think is really valuable. And but I think that, you've got to be conscious. I mean, I lived and breathed the business, and really it is, you're thinking about it, all the time. I didn't take longer than maybe a 10-day holiday. And even when I was on holiday, I would check emails every day, and in the early days of the business, I'd be actively working when I was on holiday. Once I'd got a bigger team in place, then I was much more able to actually take a proper holiday. But, you have to be prepared. If you're going to be successful, you have to be prepared that it's full on, and you do need to be prepared to live and breathe it. So that would be just something, are you passionate about enough about this? And also that the money doesn't come quickly. So I think, that can be, again, you're looking, people sort of look, perhaps at these examples in the media, but actually all these people started slowly, and they'd obviously had long careers before they came into these huge amounts of money that we're seeing them with now. And there's there's a period of probably not earning very much, if anything at all. So I think sort of being prepared for that and thinking through how are you going to manage that. And one of the things I would advise everybody, if they can, if you're thinking of starting up a business, is try and save up a little cushion. So you've got a bit of a cushion, so you've got a bit of flexibility, because you're probably going to have to work for 6 months without bringing any money in, and etc. So yeah, be prepared for that. It can take years, and it did, well, certainly did for me. There were years where I didn't earn anything. Then there were years I was just paying myself kind of a pretty much minimum wage, and then it starts to become more fruitful, and then you may or may not have the big exit at the end, but it takes a long time to get there.
Yeah, it takes years, as you say, to kind of get better. But while it's taking this, and all your friends who are not doing it, are in their corporate careers, are sort of looking at you with like amusement, because you're earning a pittance and still working ridiculous hours and apparently loving it. It doesn't really seem to make any sense. I love what you said about holidays, though, because I mean, the first 5 years of my the last business I was founded, like we had 4 children, so like children were like there from the start. And I think 10 years in, the 10-year anniversary, I was like, right, we're going to go on holiday, and it's going to be for 10 days, and I'm not going to take a phone or do any conference calls or open or have any Wi-Fi access or emails or anything. And I managed to do it, and I was like, and now it's still referred to as the one holiday we went on with Dad where he didn't do conference calls, because that was the one time. And I was like, okay, well, I managed to do it once. I mean, that's good. So another thing I wanted to talk about is, obviously, I talk to a lot of female founders. The stats on female founders, when you look not just at VCs, at banks, are appalling. I think like 95% of SME loans go to male business owners. 98% of VC money goes to male founders. When you look at the success rates, it should, by all laws, be much closer to 50-50, but there's just an unwillingness. It's interesting you said that you started just when you had children, because there's that very sexist view, we're going to lend you some money, but then what if you have kids and you're going to go off, and then what's going to happen to our investment there? So there's lots of issues that female founders have, which is why a lot of female founders are kind of forced into bootstrapping, although there are fantastic VC funds that just do investment into female-led businesses now. But as a female founder, and probably I'm thinking Events was perhaps less guilty of this, but as a female founder, did you find it more challenging or different, or did you think you were sometimes being treated differently because you were a female founder as opposed to how a male founder would have been treated? And if so, how did you kind of rationalize that and sort of move through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think not in a terribly negative way. I don't think I had any, was terribly badly treated. But then, as I wasn't looking to raise finance, and I think sometimes it can be a benefit because it's a bit more novel. So actually it can be a benefit. I mean, I had plenty of comedy moments. I've had people just assuming that I had a man backing me. So I had certainly, various people would sort of say, so who's your boss? And I'd be like, oh no, well I'm the managing director. Oh yes, but who's funded you? There was almost like an assumption that behind me was a kind of a man sort of really in control. So, but that's more just sort of funny conversations. But there was quite a few of them over the years, and people who just couldn't quite get their head around the fact that it might be just me. But I don't think it did me a disservice. Being a woman, and actually a lot of our employees really enjoyed the fact they were working for a female founded business and would talk about that. They saw it as a positive thing. So yeah, I think there's benefits as well.
Just coming back to your growth again for a second. So when you're growing, like from all sorts of points of view, when you're growing internationally and starting to do things all over the world, you're moving into markets, you're encountering different cultures, different business cultures, different economics things, different ways of doing business. Just sometimes kind of just everything seems completely upside down compared to how you're used to doing it in certain markets. So how challenging, not so much the startup phase, but sort of the scale up phase, like maybe sort of 2016 to 2024. How challenging, what were some of the challenges you found as you scaled up and did more and more things internationally, and how did you sort of rationalize and overcome some of those things?
I mean, obviously we did a lot of work in the US, but the US is a very, very positive market for conferences and events. So no challenges there. It's actually much more, we find that compared to the UK, people in America, very much see attending conferences and speaking at conferences, as a high value opportunity, whereas in the
Yeah.
UK it's sort of something that people moan about having to do. So very different. But so in terms of other markets, I mean, actually, we moved into Singapore, which has been, that was an event I was very heavily involved in, and actually, in that market, it's very, very much about relationships, very much about relationships with the key kind of government stakeholders and government agencies. And that takes a lot of time, and that doesn't necessarily immediately yield visible revenues, so it's something you have to kind of invest that time in. But I think actually that was because of my sort of formative career in my 20s when I was working in the Middle East. That was a very similar model, and actually my job involved a lot of that was, forming relationships with kind of government agencies in the markets we were working with. So I think that was very useful when we were entering the Singaporean market. And I think we built some really fantastic relationships there. When it came to Latin America, I'm going to have to say I was very fortunate in terms of a recruit who came to us who had lived and worked in Brazil in the past and spoke Brazilian Portuguese. I think without him, it would have been much harder for us to access that market. But having someone who did understand, well, hey, speak the language, but just understand the cultural nuances about how to do business in that market was absolutely invaluable and really helped us. So yeah, so I think if you don't have the knowledge yourself, bring people into the team who do.
And just mentioning the UK there,
Mm.
so I mean, I've found, if I compare launching a business in Singapore, Middle East, Australia, Canada, the US, the UK, I would probably, despite being English, say that the market that's hardest as a startup, where there's the most resistance to a new idea, certainly compared to the US or Singapore, where it's like, hey, you're a
Mm.
one-person band. That's amazing. Let's have a meeting. How can I help?
Yeah.
I would say the UK is quite difficult market from a
Mm.
startup point of view when you're going out as a startup. Is that something you experienced and found? It's a very risk averse market, or not so much in your area?
I think actually, conference and events is one area where the UK we're particularly strong. It is an industry where we have a good market there. I think it was okay. Actually, I was surprised by, because if I think about it, when you start a conference, say with our first World Water Tech business, I mean you're selling an idea.
Yeah.
It's you're putting together you're convincing people to come along on something that is suddenly a concept, and actually people did. They bought into it. People did buy into it. I remember our first sponsor, or was Accenture, and it was amazing because obviously it's brilliant in our first year. And I remember the lady from Accenture suddenly saying to me, she was like, "Hang on a sec," she said. I talked to you about the speaker. You sold me the sponsorship package. The marketing emails have come from you, and I've just checked, and the invoice has come from you as well. She was like, "Is it just you?" I was like, "Oh, there's like four of us here." But if she suddenly clocked, like, hang on a sec, we'd given the impression of being a bigger organization by the way we spoke and the way we acted and what we
Yeah, that's
presented.
so essential at the start in any
Yeah,
market. You have to make
yeah,
it sound like this. You're just the face of this quite large
yeah,
organization of 5, 10, 15 people, just to
yeah.
kind of like get some comfort there.
Exactly. So I'd obviously given the impression of being bigger, but then she'd realised after scratching the surface, hang on a sec, you're doing everything. But they still came on board, so that was okay.
We had a similar thing where we did exactly the same thing, and
Mm,
there was 32
mm,
of us at the time,
mm.
and we got the largest bank in Australia as a client, and we had tried to employ someone, and unknown to us, we had decided not to employ them because we couldn't afford it, and they'd then gone to work for this exact person that had subscribed
Oh,
and
mhm,
told them this whole mirage we created of all these different things going on was exactly that. But they
mhm,
subscribed anyway, and they only told us
mm.
afterwards at a Christmas drink that they thought the whole thing was hilarious because we used to turn up and talk about all these things and people going on, like, and they knew we were just making the whole thing up because they had this person working for them that they never told us, by the way, that person you almost employed is now working in our team, and we know all about it. But yeah, it was amusing afterwards.
That's funny. But they
Nothing
obviously
serious about it.
believed in you. They believed in you.
Exactly. And
Mhm,
that leads me kind of on to my final
mm,
question. Like, everybody talks a lot about, mental stress, mental resilience,
mm.
like, you're living it, you're breathing it, it's all you think about for years. There's you earn a pittance, if anything, for a long period of time. And even then you might not get a successful exit. You might just, be keeping your head above water. So what for you is the single most joy of being a founder and of running your own business?
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned earlier sort of, people who don't like being told what to do. And I think, it's being that decision maker. It's being able to, when you have an idea, being able to implement it, being able to make it happen, being able to move fast. I think anyone who's worked for a large company, there's so many processes, there's so many layers that need to go through, that a lot of the kind of ideas you have or innovations kind of get lost or diluted along the way. And I think, founding your own business and being able to think, we think, right, there's an opportunity to do an event in, we did Blue Food, which is, all around kind of aquaculture, sustainable seafood. We had that idea, we had the event running 6 months later. You can move very quickly. So I really enjoyed that, the kind of the pace, being able to say, yes, we need to do that and we can do it. And I also think, yeah, building the team. If I think about what I miss now that I've left, it was the team. You can build a team around you of people that you like and respect, and that share your values, and you build that, and you build that culture. And I think that's really, yeah, a lovely part of being a founder.
Fantastic. Jenny, thank you very much. We're out of time, but thank you for joining us. I've got lots more questions, but no time to go through them now. But I'd love to talk at another stage. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me and sharing all your stories and lessons and successes and failures. And yeah, that was a great chat. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. It was good to chat.
For all our listeners, if you'd like to hear more podcasts on how to bootstrap, or if you want to access all our bootstrapping resources and playbooks, then just go to our website, www.bootstrapconfidential.com, for free registration.